Penguin Random House presents Planning Democracy, How a Professor, an Institute and an Idea Shaped India by Nikhil Menon, read by Shahzad Bhiwandiwala. For Amma, Achan and Nitya. Introduction. The recently elected Prime Minister of India addressed the nation from the sandstone ramparts of Red Fort in Delhi, his turban's long trail flapping in the dry, dusty summer breeze. It was Independence Day 2014 and Narendra Modi's debut on this storied stage. With the Mughal fort's soaring minarets as a backdrop, Jama Masjid's giant white marble dome looming to his left, and the Indian flag fluttering overhead, he put to rest months of rumour. The leader of the Bharatiya Janata Party confirmed what the public had suspected. The end was near for India's long experiment with economic planning. The curtain was coming down on the Planning Commission, an institution that had once been the beating heart of the country's economy. Born the same year, Modi and the Planning Commission shared another milestone together. In his first Independence Day address as India's leader, Modi declared that the Planning Commission had once merited its place and made significant contributions. Now, however, he believed it had decayed beyond repair. Sometimes it costs a lot to repair an old house, he said. But it gives us no satisfaction. Afterwards we realize that we might as well build a new house, Modi explained with a smile. He would build it by bulldozing a decrepit structure and raising a shiny new one, the Niti Aayog, National Institution for Transforming India. 64 years earlier, days after the inauguration of the Republic, President Rajendra Prasad delivered a speech in Parliament. The thickly moustached veteran of the Congress Party declared on 31st January 1950 that the primary objective of his government would be to raise standards of living. In order to do so, he announced, "It is my government's intention to establish a planning commission so that the best use can be made of such resources as we possess for the development of the nation." The Planning Commission was born. The Indian Planning Project was one of the post-colonial world's most ambitious experiments. It was an arranged marriage between Soviet-inspired economic planning and Western-style liberal democracy, at a time when the Cold War portrayed them as ideologically contradictory and institutionally incompatible. With each 5-year plan, the Planning Commission set the course for the nation's economy. The ambit ranged from matters broad, free trade or protectionism, to narrow, how much fish should fisheries produce to ensure protein in the national diet. The Commission's pronouncements set the gears of government in motion, shaping entire sectors of the economy through incentives, disincentives, and decree. The Planning Commission's views rippled across the land to every farm and factory. Despite this awesome power, economic planning in India was considerably different from the kind practiced in communist regimes. The Planning Commission was reined in by democratic procedures that required consultation with ministries in an elected government, with people's representatives in Parliament, and ultimately with the popular will, through citizens voting every 5 years. During the formative decades of the Republic, the urge to plan governed the nation. It was the vehicle chosen for rapid economic transformation after nearly 2 centuries of colonial rule, and it also became the language through which the government's aspirations for democratic state-building were expressed. It was a staple of national conversation, and 5-year plans marked the calendar of governance. Politicians seldom tired of invoking the plans, while the media dutifully reported on their progress. They were debated in civil society, and citizens found themselves called to work ever more energetically towards the plan's success. As India emerged from generations of colonial rule in 1947, it faced the following question: Would life be any better for 350 million Indians? Dr. Bhimrao Ambedkar, arch-critic of caste and architect of the Constitution, articulated the fear that was on the minds of many. In his last speech to the Constituent Assembly in late 1949, Ambedkar warned that India was about to enter a life of contradictions. "In politics, we will have equality," he said, "and in social and economic life, we will have inequality. These conflicts demanded attention, fail to do so, and those denied will blow up the structure of political democracy." The Indian government seemingly agreed, at least about the economy. The first 5-year plan noted that the international context made planning not only compatible with democracy, but essential for its very survival. The Indian drama had the world watching. Files from the British Foreign Office and the American State Department reveal that they too shared Ambedkar's fear. The fledgling nation was widely believed to be doomed. The extraordinary challenge posed by India's diversity and poverty appeared insurmountable. The ugly orgy of ethnic violence and sectarian nationalism that erupted during partition seemed a dark omen. Predictions ranged from India splintering into smaller nations to believing it was on the brink of going red under the malevolent influence of Mao's China or Stalin's Soviet Union. There was speculation that it was ripe for authoritarian takeover. Seen from Washington, D.C. and the capitals of Western Europe, the peril was not just to democracy in India, but also to the viability of democracy globally. If breathless columns in the New York Times are to be believed, the fate of democracy in Asia hung in the balance. India was a bastion against communism, and the best hope of democracy in the Far East. Mao's China and Nehru's India were locked in a battle of communist dictatorship versus democratic freedom. Reflecting on his visit to India, Martin Luther King Jr. wrote from Chicago that it would be a boon to democracy if one of the great nations of the world could provide for its people without surrendering to a dictatorship of either the right or left. In New Delhi, the influential director of the Ford Foundation in India, Douglas Ensminger, noted in a confidential staff document that the world has anxiously watched India's experiences in planning and executing its plans through democratic means. Writing for The Observer in Britain, Thomas Ballow, an Oxford economist who later entered the House of Lords, described India's experiment in stark terms. His prediction was that it may become crucial for the future of the free world. The Indian government was trying to modernize a vast, materially backward country through consent, to achieve democratically what had hitherto been undertaken, on a comparable scale, only by communist dictatorships. Confronting similar afflictions, the eyes of decolonizing Asia and Africa anxiously tracked India's moves. Planning was meant to resolve what Ambedkar had called a life of contradictions by providing Indians with parity in their political and economic freedoms. Jawaharlal Nehru recognized the tension between the two, but he believed they could be eased through planning. Planning, though inevitably bringing about a great deal of control and coordination and interfering in some measure with individual freedom, would, as a matter of fact, in the context of India today, lead to a vast increase of freedom. Nehru was implicitly suggesting that the existence of civil liberties on paper would matter little if citizens lacked the material capabilities to enjoy them. The stakes couldn't be higher. As Ambedkar warned and the international press recognized, failure to act could put liberal democracy itself in peril. Development was long fundamental to arguments for why India needed to be free. An economic critique of colonialism was found.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?